Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, our featured highlight here on our online newsroom in the Ohio Senate, On the Record, the views the news excludes. I'm your host, Director of Communications, John Fortney, and sitting in this week for the President is Ohio Senator Rob McColley, a Republican from Northwest Ohio. That's the 1st District, Napoleon, Ohio, and he is also the Majority Leader of the Ohio Majority Caucus. Welcome.
Thanks, John, for the opportunity. Happy to be here.
You know, you really have some insider perspective about what the redistricting process is like because you have been a member of the Redistricting Commission 2 years ago, I guess, and then also this past September. This past September, the result was a 7-0 unanimous vote that included, of course, the 2 Democrats on the commission for bipartisan maps for both the House and Senate of the Ohio General Assembly. What changed?
Well, I would say what changed is that the process worked exactly how it was supposed to work and how it was contemplated, as you can see from reading Article 11 of the Ohio Constitution. Both sides are supposed to have legitimate trade-offs and cost-benefit analyses that they're supposed to be conducting throughout the process. It's never meant to be a one side wins, the other side loses, no matter what. And unfortunately, that's what we saw the last time we went into redistricting. No negotiation is going to work if a third party comes in and tells one party, hey, heads you win, tails the other side loses. What incentive would any party have to negotiate under that circumstance? The answer is they wouldn't. And so that's what was happening the last time with the Ohio Supreme Court coming in and exceeding the bounds of the plain language of the Ohio Constitution, is that they were essentially signaling to the minority party, heads you win, tails the other side loses. And so the minority party, and you can see even in their legislative proposals that they continue to offer at every stage of the negotiation, they became more and more entrenched in maps that would benefit them more than the previous map that they introduced.
They call that representational fairness, which is really just a fancy term for gerrymandering.
Yes, court-ordered gerrymandering in this case, because as most people would admit, if they're being objectively fair and truthful, Ohio has some challenging political geography. As much as there may be precincts across Ohio, primarily in the rural areas that are 70-30 Republicans to Democrats, that are going to make it difficult to draw Democrat districts in those areas. There are precincts in other parts of the state where I would say that the Democrat population in Ohio is even more condensed, is even more packed into certain areas, primarily in our urban areas, where those precincts in some cases are 90-10. Democrat to Republican. And so, especially with the other provisions regarding the splitting of geography that are contained in Article 11, it makes it very difficult to draw majority Democrat districts because there are only so many precincts in the entire state that would make that are majority Democrat. And of course, you need a lot of precincts to make a 120,000 more or less person House district or a 360,000 person more or less Senate district. And so the political geography is challenging. Thankfully, both sides were able to acknowledge and admit that this time and come to an agreement because it was in our best interest all along. And that was one other big difference is both sides came in realizing there isn't a guaranteed win at the end of the tunnel. It was in both of our best interests to come to a unanimous agreement and have a map that would last 8 years, and that's what we did.
That was part of your statement when the commission also passed the unanimous 7-0 vote for the maps. You said, tonight we proved that good faith negotiations with our colleagues from both sides of the aisle, guided by the process approved by the voters. Remember that this was a process approved by the voters in 2015, I think it was,
yes.
Right? Approved by the voters to draw legislative districts can work exactly the way it was intended to work when not undermined by out-of-state special interest groups. which are still trying to do the exact same thing as the NDRC, the National Democratic Redistricting Commission, led by Eric Holder and his lawyer Mark Elias, along with the League of Women Voters in Ohio, which I affectionately like to refer to the League of Liberal Misinformation, have again challenged the 7-0 vote and the set of maps passed by the commission. So again, they seem so focused on Section 6 of Article 11, which talks about proportionality, but that only comes into play if you don't do the other sections required. In fact, I have right here our response to their lawsuit. It says, objectors' challenges fail because nowhere do they claim that the plan violates sections 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7 of Article 11 of the Constitution, without which this court has no power to enforce the proportionality rule they advance under 6. 6 was always aspirational when it was first passed off the floor.
Yeah, when you look at the language, it's pretty clear. Every other section, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 of Article 11 says the commission shall do the following. The commission shall comply with these duties and these obligations. When you go into Section 6 of Article 11, which is the anti-gerrymandering sections, it basically says if all else fails, the commission shall attempt to do the following, shall try. Unfortunately, and that's kind of the last part of the analysis. If the commission cannot achieve the other goals and objectives that have been laid out in the amendment and approved by the voters, what happened with the last court opinion is the court allowed the tail to wag the dog. The court looked at the partisan symmetry arguments that they crafted out of their own opinions.
That the federal court, by the way, the 3-member federal appeals court, said you could not easily find. I think the quote was like on page 38 or page 36 of their ruling.
Nowhere to be found.
Yeah, it said that cannot easily be found anywhere in the Ohio Constitution, which was a polite yet very stern pushback on the 4-member majorities.
Exactly, and so when you look at Section 6 of Article 11, with these provisions in it. Like I said, it's aspirational. It says you shall attempt to do these. It doesn't say you shall do it. And in the absence of the shall language, clearly the drafters and the voters approved something that says you shall do these things, you shall attempt to do others. So under normal manners of legal interpretation, that clearly means it's an aspirational and something you should try. But the court, in the previous opinions where they struck down the decisions, basically wanted to skip everything else. And they wanted to get to a map that met the partisan breakdown. And as we talked about earlier, the political geography of the state of Ohio is challenging. And it's challenging because to find majority Democrat districts, you can only find majority Democrat precincts in a large enough volume to create a House or a Senate district. You can only find those in certain parts of the state, probably only 6 or 7 counties throughout the state.
Yep. In fact, part of the response from us and the commission says in 82 of Ohio's 88 counties, where 58% of Ohioans live, the Constitution's mandatory neutral geographic requirements of sections 2 through 5 and 7, what we just talked about, command how districts are constructed, and their political output will be what it will be. Because objectors, or the NDRC and the League, know they cannot find more Democrat-leaning districts in those 82 counties, they're content to have those neutral requirements apply in those 82. But because the other 42% of Ohioans live in the remaining 6 urban counties, Cuyahoga, Franklin, Hamilton, Lucas, Montgomery, and Summit, the objectors demand that the commission begin with their preferred political outputs. That methodology violates Article 11.
So exactly. So what you're seeing is at the expense of every other provision of Article 11, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7, talking about not splitting cities, not unnecessarily splitting counties, keeping communities whole.
This was all about compactness, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
From the beginning, that's what the voters passed.
That's exactly what the voters passed. Is they came in and they said, we don't want to have gerrymandered maps that split up communities and cities and counties and townships unnecessarily just to achieve a partisan goal. Yet that's what we were being forced to do the last time around, is to pack and crack and go hub and spoke model down in deep into urban cores, and then have little, whatever analogy you want to use, pieces of pie, pieces of pizza, hub and spoke, like I said earlier, branching
not
out from
compact
there.
districts.
Exactly, and drawing them into sometimes overwhelmingly Republican areas, just to achieve some sort of partisan goal at the end. And inherently, if you come in with your number one goal being a partisan goal, then you are gerrymandering. And in this case, that was what happened when the court was ordering the commission the last time to go in with their number one goal being a partisan one. It was court-ordered gerrymandering.
That's called negotiating in bad faith. Yeah. Wouldn't you think that if you lived considering the new map for both the House and the Senate, I think it would be very reasonable to think, well, if I live in Toledo, I'm a Toledoan, so I live within the city, so shouldn't my representation at the State House represent all of Toledo? And wasn't that what the commission was able to do in some of the major cities that did not fall outside or weren't more populated than what the limit required?
Exactly, that's what we did. We came in with the goal that we're not going to split cities. There's only one city in the entire map that was split, that didn't have to be split, and that's the city of Mentor up in Lake County. That ended up having to be split for a number of reasons. And when I say for the listeners out there, cities that didn't need to be split, certainly the city of Columbus is larger than a Senate district. It's larger than a House district. It's going to have to be split among Senate and House districts. Same thing with the city of Cleveland. But when you look even at the city of Cincinnati, the city of Toledo, the city of Dayton, the city of Akron, they all fit within a Senate district. And there's no reason that they should not be contained within a Senate district, because that is true representational fairness. That is true representing those communities with somebody who can be focused on their needs and what the unique issues are to those communities. And so in the previous map, Cincinnati was split, Toledo was split, Akron was split. And what you saw in this map is a return to what I believe people voted for, is we kept those communities together, and as a result, we made those communities more likely to be represented by somebody who shares their interest and shares their goals and is going to be able to better represent them in the long run.
You know, make no mistake that a lot of these out-of-state special interest groups like the NDRC, All on the Line Ohio is basically its organization in the state of Ohio. I like to call them All to Undermine Ohio. But Senate President Matt Huffman said regarding the NDRC, the league's lawsuit, said, "This is yet another desperate power grab by Washington, D.C. special interests that have no business holding the people of Ohio and the process hostage, which produced a unanimous 7-0 bipartisan vote establishing new maps." I mean, this is all about power to them. Any power that they can grab, because you know where you don't see the NDRC? Illinois.
California, New York, et cetera, all other states that have had terrible partisan gerrymanders that would make Ohio, any claims of gerrymandering in Ohio look like child's play when you go to those areas. And yet Eric Holder and his group are nowhere to be found in those areas. So you are correct. This is all a macro strategy at the national level to grab power for one side and not the other. It has nothing to do with wanting what's best for the voters, or wanting these communities to be kept whole, or trying to achieve the goals that have been approved by the Ohio voters in 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 sections of Article 11 of the Ohio Constitution. It has everything to do with macro power grab strategies from Washington, D.C.
And they're well funded. They have plenty of money to sue anywhere, anytime, as many times as they want to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen that before, where for as much as people want to talk about dark money on the side of the Republicans, if anything, it's just projection from the leftists to try and let us not focus on the dark money coming from their side. And people don't like to hear this, but just look into it, do your own research. The dark money on the left, it is exponentially larger than any form of dark money that might be on the right. And it's funded in many cases through a web of a complicated web of different avenues and money groups that are designed in some cases to conceal the source.
International corporations.
International corporations, and then sometimes foreign citizens that are coming in and funding to the tune of millions of dollars, sometimes up to as much as $250 million into one set of groups from international citizens from, in this case, the one I mentioned was from Europe, who are coming in and trying to reshape the United States $250 million at a time, and trying to do so to conceal the source of what they're doing. And I think that's something that, again, you won't see anybody talk about it because it doesn't fit the narrative of Democrats being able to point at Republicans and saying that they're the ones doing all the dark money issues and everything like that. But the truth of the matter is the Democrat side of the operation is large, it's complex, and it is extremely well-funded to dwarf any sort of opposition.
Search World Economic Forum on social media when you have a moment, and you'll get a sense of really what's going on there. That's for another show, though. Interesting, this is about Article 11 of the Constitution. Article 19 speaks to congressional redistricting. Interesting how that ended, when suddenly the group suing said, oh, you know, this map will work. This map will work, right? Because to be very clear, something you don't see reported, and I wonder if it's omitted or if it's a staffing issue sometimes with newspapers, but there was a story over the weekend out of the Youngstown Vindy.com that talked a little bit about that, but omitted the part about how the U.S. Supreme Court vacated the 4-3 majority's ruling from the Ohio Supreme Court, saying, we're going to vacate that unconstitutional ruling that they ruled the congressional map was unconstitutional, which then by default says it is constitutional. All of that was omitted from the story. And then the special interest group said, oh, this map is just fine.
Exactly, and it's laughable when members of the media in particular don't do their homework and realize what it means to have a ruling vacated. It means it's as if the ruling never happened. And so in the case of the Ohio case that went up to the Supreme Court regarding congressional district rulings, you are correct. The Ohio Supreme Court did rule the Ohio congressional map unconstitutional. It went up to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court said, in light of our opinion in Moore v. Harper, which was a case out of North Carolina that was decided just before, a week or two before the Ohio news came down from the United States Supreme Court, in light of Moore v. Harper, we have decided, and we've basically had an opinion in that case that says courts cannot exceed the bounds of judicial review. What that means is courts cannot impose extra constitutional duties or duties that are outside the plain language of the Constitution. Courts cannot exceed their bounds of just simply saying, calling balls and strikes, saying it is or it is not constitutional. And in the case of Ohio's congressional district maps, the United States Supreme Court clearly said, clearly gave the impression that the Ohio Supreme Court exceeded the bounds of judicial review by imposing additional duties outside of the plain language of the Constitution upon the Commission. It vacated those Supreme Court rulings, which means, to your point, our maps are presumptively constitutional in the absence of a ruling that declares otherwise. There is no ruling that declares otherwise, which means the congressional maps that are currently in place are constitutional. And so that's anybody suggesting otherwise, and I'm sure you're going to hear an awful lot from people saying that Ohio is operating under unconstitutional maps. It is simply false, and it is intentionally misleading.
Yeah, it's politically dishonest. And bottom line, it's dishonest.
Yep.
That I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to talk about what vacating a rule by the U.S. Supreme Court really says.
Well, and it wasn't even that. It was vacating the ruling, and so it was eliminating that ruling. Thereby, the maps are no longer unconstitutional. It remanded the decision back to the Ohio Supreme Court to review in light of Moore v. Harper and that recent Supreme Court case. And it also granted review at the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, not only are we going to eliminate your previous ruling, but we're going to make you decide this case again, and oh, by the way, it will come right back to us after you do. That, if anything, is not a win for the side that wanted to see this declared unconstitutional. If anything, it's a clear indication that what the former Supreme Court did was unconstitutional, outside the bounds of judicial review, and the United States Supreme Court thankfully saw through it. And so, coincidentally enough, as you averred to, the petitioners in that case who wanted to see the maps declared unconstitutional found it in their best interest to dismiss the case, probably because they realized, look, maybe these maps weren't as bad as we said they were to begin with. They ended up winning seats that they previously said they couldn't. Imagine that, because they had good candidates and good campaigns in those districts. And all of a sudden, those maps seemed a lot rosier than they did before.
Candidates, campaigns, and issues matter.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it comes down to. And you can't ask a court to deliver a result for you in districts that on paper you should win, but that you are not winning because you don't have good candidates and you don't have good issues to run on. And that's really what's been happening across the country, really, in many of these redistricting cases. They're wanting court-ordered seats to be given to one side and not the other.
One thing I think I pointed out during 2 podcasts ago with President Huffman about this topic was that in Ohio, under the old set, or currently based on the state Senate representation, the members that are in the state Senate, there are 15 districts that lean Democrat, or as we say, indexed Democrat, based on demographics, based on population geography. 8 of those 15 are held by Republicans. So candidates, campaigns, and issues do matter. Regardless of what the district is indexed to, you can still win if you run the right person on the right issues and your campaign is solid.
Absolutely, and that's what I mean when I say on paper, if we decided things simply by the partisan lean of the district, Ohio Senate districts right now would be 18 to 15. But we have very good senators on the Republican side who are very good at knowing their district's needs, being responsive to those needs, running on the issues that are important to those districts, and delivering results at the end of the day. And that's what has enabled the Senate to grow to its record-breaking majority right now.
And of course, we still see the left trying all it can to rewrite the process. In fact, their main campaign front person is the former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor, with a voluminous amendment, the language of which was just approved by the ballot board, so the petition drive could start. But to try to take it to a citizen panel, well, who appoints a citizen panel? And the question I have is, this is inherently, is it not, a political process, because you are talking about political districts within the Ohio General Assembly, of which there are 132. Can politics and political lines ever be totally removed from the process, as they are alleging that they can do?
No, they cannot. And when you look at the proposed ballot, or the proposed amendment language that was put out there, in essence, it's doing what Maureen O'Connor, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, and at the time, the liberal majority on the court wanted to do. It's allowing that tail of the dog that we were talking about before to be the dog. It's basically saying we are going to put partisan representation above all else, above splitting of communities, above splitting of cities and counties, above keeping various communities together that should be kept together, like the city of Toledo or Dayton or Akron or even Cincinnati. It's doing all of that at the, it's getting rid of that at the expense of keeping those communities together.
Why would you want the judiciary or retired judges, former members of the judiciary, to be the people in charge of drawing maps in Ohio for the General Assembly, which is a separate branch unto itself, the legislative branch, the political boundaries of which it would be a strong argument to say perhaps members of the General Assembly should be involved in helping determine what the political boundaries of both the House and Senate are, because the people, the registered voters of Ohio, vote on who they send to those districts, to the State House.
Yeah, and I think, buyer beware on this. When you look at the other states that have had independent redistricting commissions, I believe Virginia, California, et cetera, it has gone disastrously. And it has been anything but nonpartisan. I can assure you of that. It's achieved some of the most partisan gerrymander results in the entire country. It goes unreported because those are all for one side and not the other. And so buyer beware. People need to do their homework on this and realize it's not what they think it is going to be. And the other cautionary tale is the amendment that we approved in 2015, as we talked about earlier, was approved with over 70% of the vote. It received an awful lot of fanfare, not only from voters, but also from editorial boards across the state when it was put before the voters. It didn't work the first time because, as we've discussed, the court interjected itself beyond what its bounds should have been, and essentially said, hey, you over there, heads you win, tails the other side loses, which is going to pollute the entire negotiation from the very beginning. In fact, the Chief Justice's concurring opinion in the very first redistricting opinion that was wrote, she seemingly chastised the entire voting population of the state of Ohio for getting it wrong, and that they should never have agreed to this, thereby signaling to the minority party that I'm never going to approve anything that this commission does unless it's a 7-0 vote, which means that the minority party has no reason to negotiate with the majority party at all on the commission.
We'll roll the dice and keep on filing lawsuit after lawsuit, and perhaps we'll get what we get.
Exactly. And so the one time that this process has been able to play out the way it was intended to play out, it worked. And it had got a unanimous 7-0 vote where we're going to have a map for the rest of the decade where people can have certainty. And it did so in a way that achieved gains for the minority party. They're going to, in all likelihood, should be picking up seats under this map. But like we said before, campaigns and candidates matter, so we'll see. But the map, I would argue, is better for them now than the map that was passed 2 years ago. And so it worked the way it was supposed to work. And so all of this effort to throw the baby out with the bathwater, when we finally were able to see the process work free from outside interference, would be very premature, in my opinion.
State Senator Rob McColley, Republican from the 1st District in Ohio. That's Northwest Ohio, Napoleon, Ohio. Thanks so much for your time and insight today on the record with the Ohio Senate, the President's Podcast. You'd be a great guest host, too, right?
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to the President's Podcast as well. Remember, you can subscribe to the President's Podcast and our online newsroom called On the Record. On your phone, it's right there at the very center part of the top part of the page. On your desktop, it is off to the left, the President's Podcast off to the right. As always, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you soon.